Hello and welcome into another edition of Huber and Friends. I'm Jeremy Huber, and I'm joined today a special treat on the week that college football really gets going. A guy who calls one of the more famous college football programs in America, Pete Medhurst, the voice of Navy football, Navy basketball, also Rosecroft Raceway. Pete, thank you so much for joining us on Huber and Friends.
Jeremy, good to be with you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and you're a guy that I know that is kind of Mr. Sports around here, but we always start these things off the same way with the question, how did we meet?
I guess in person would have been along the trail at AU when you were doing color with Dan Lang on some of the American University broadcasts. But I feel like I'm almost with you every day because when I listen to Sirius XM, I hear you doing the various updates on a lot of the different channels. So it's almost as if we've, been friends and we've been part of each other's broadcasting careers just because of all the work that both of us are very fortunate to get here in the local area.
And it's funny because back in the day, you're talking about with the with Navy coming down to American, or we'd go over there. It was one of the few times that that Dan and I could kind of get to talk to the other opposing announcer because there was limited time, or we weren't going on the road as much. So it was always fun, and you were always a guy that could you would get the scoop from Pete Medhurst on the team. You were always so prepared to give exactly what was going on with your squad, so that was always very helpful.
Well, look, obviously, we see our teams every day. So, there are, I don't think it's as bad as it used to be. I think at one point there was some real territorialism, if you will, to our business. But through the years, I think a lot of people have gotten a lot more helpful. They're a lot more approachable. Many with no ego whatsoever. There are people that you might expect large ego from in our business. And when you don't get it, you're almost pleasantly surprised. And not that they do it on purpose, but sometimes people get to be so good at this that, if they had that, you would certainly understand. But look, let's face it, you see your team all the time. I see my team all the time. What better way to get information about those teams than to be approachable, share it with each other, and help the both of us, do a great broadcast. Because ultimately, that's what that's what I'm in this for. I'm not, I got guys that send me stuff all the time. Hey, can you listen to this? A lot of great young broadcasters who, I was them once, and I would have given anything to have, social media where we could reach out to people with a lot more access and say, hey, could you kind of listen to this for me to tell me whether I'm good or whether I got stuff to work on. But that's what it's all about, man. I think most of us are here to help each other, help young broadcasters get better. And we have amazing platforms now and formats that allow us to do that. And it's really cool to see, to be honest with you.
Pete, it's interesting. I'm not going to say our careers are similar, but our backgrounds are similar, but kind of funhouse mirrors, I guess, be the right term. I'm a Northern Virginia kid. You're a Southern Maryland guy. So basically we're on the other side of DC, but still getting that influence. What was it like growing up where you grew up in regards to life, in regards to your career? And here's the bigger question. Were you a Baltimore guy or a Washington guy when it came to sports?
See, that's a great question. To be honest with you, it was kind of both. We didn't have baseball in D.C. When I was growing up, so it forced us to go to Baltimore. The Colts played at 2:00 in the afternoon some Sundays, so it allowed us to kind of view both. Because even at a young age, I kind of, look, at a young age, I wanted at least, I started, I wanted to be a broadcaster since I was 5. I was raised by my grandparents. My grandfather gave me a tape recorder, a little Panasonic cassette tape recorder when I was 5. And I'd sit in front of the TV broadcasting games all the time. My grandfather would have to pick me up, from the living room floor, drag me into the kitchen for Thanksgiving dinner. I'm like, Dad, I called him Dad, obviously. I'm like, Dad, I'm broadcasting the Cowboys game, I got to wait. But, I think the thing about it is growing up, we were lucky enough. My birth mother worked for Abe Poland and the Bullets and the Capitals at the Capitol Center. So, I'm 8 years old and I'm sitting 8 rows off of the floor watching Gervin and Elvin in the, playoffs, the year the Bullets won the whole thing, I'm sitting right on the aisle, 8 rows off the floor because we had access to tickets. I'm sitting, on Wes Unseld's lap at Christmas time. So you take it all in because as I tell kids all the time now, if you're in the Bay Area, you're blessed to be around multiple professional sports franchises. You never know when the opportunity is going to present itself to go work and do some work for one of them. So I think we had the pleasure of growing up in amazing areas, and that's having Baltimore and Washington available to us. Obviously as a kid, my grandfather, worked a lot with. He'd see a lot of the Redskins when they came in because he was in the distilled beverage industry. So he would see several of the players coming through some of his locales. Got to meet Chris Hamburger, who really became my first ever, that's my favorite player type guy. Got to meet Burt Jones, the quarterback of the Colts. So when I got into youth football, Burt Jones was a guy that you wanted to emulate. Him and Joe Theismann. I mean, we had 2 great quarterbacks at that time that you wanted to emulate because of the way, that they played. So gave us great. And it was funny. You showed that great picture right there. I picked 25. It was my first. That was the first year I ever played youth football. And I wanted to be like Eddie Brown, who was the kick returner. He was actually a safety too, but he was a kick returner for the Redskins. So being able to emulate people like that, it was a fun time, but it was the love for sports that I had at that age. And, it was funny. I had a chance the other day. Finally, they built a beautiful plaque for my first ever youth football coach over at Dunkirk Park. And one of my roles now with Anne Arundel County Recreation and Parks is I get to go around as an assistant sports supervisor and checking in on football games is one of my, assignments. And this week I had to go to Dunkirk Park for the first time since they built that plaque. And it was really emotional because, I'm 54 years old now. Football's been a part of my life, literally for 47 years. And the fact that, Coach Remington, Jim Remington was awesome. And to be able to see that plaque, see kids in football uniforms just sitting on the bench in front of it and just, looking at it like, hey, man, that was me, as a kid. And to see that now, having all those teams available to us in the area was awesome. I mean, there's nothing like sitting in a sky suite at the Capitol Center watching the Capitals get beat 11-0 by the Montreal Canadiens. But it was going to a professional sporting event. So to me, it was the coolest thing, and I essentially rooted for all of them.
Pete, I was doing some research, and it said that you gave a quote to somebody once that you didn't do much worse than going to the arcade when you were young because you were so obsessed with sports. I can tell from that age, but as you get older, there are other influences. Why did you feel like you kind of stayed on that, hey, I'm a sports guy path?
It was, I think, the passion for it at a young age. It was the one thing I wanted to do. I mean, I got the most talkative senior superlative in high school. All my friends from high school will tell you we'd sit at the lunch tables in elementary and middle school and high school, and all we'd talk about is sports. When anybody had a sports question, they'd come ask Pete. But that's, I mean, they tell you in life, if you find a passion for something, pursue it. As young people, we have people that pursue being a fireman, being a policeman, a teacher, those types of things. Whatever your passion is, and you're lucky enough to identify it at a young age, that's what you want to do. I mean, look, let's face it. I'm 8 years old calling Ken Beatrice on WMAL. Felix Grant used to get mad because Ken would come on at 10 and I'd start trying to call it like 9:40. And I'm like, Felix, I'm 8. I gotta go to bed at some point. So I need to be one of the first callers, when Ken starts the program. 432 WMAL. That's how you reach us here on Sports Call. Because Ken would bounce back and forth. For a few years he'd be 7-10, then make him 10-1. Boy, when they made him 10-1, that was tough for a young guy. But having an influence like Ken Beatrice in our town, he was him and Bernie Smilovitz and Phil Wood would do a show, I know, down on WTOP. You had great Baltimore influences like Vince Bagley on TV at a very young age for us. So there, and obviously you look at the TV announcers as I was growing up in Washington, D.C. I mean, dude, it doesn't get much better than George Michael on 4, Glenn Brenner on 9, and Tim Brandt on 7. him, Mike Patrick, Dan Lovett. I mean, that all those guys that came through at that time. Then eventually Buck takes over at Channel 5 with Chick eventually. And, I mean, it's just, dude, it was an incredible time for those of us growing up in this area. We had probably as many sports media influences as any market in the country at that time. Very fortunate to do that. And, George Michael was must-watch television. Then you'd flip to 9 to see Glenn Brenner. I mean, you just flip from channel to channel because you had to see what all those people were talking about. And, that's where that passion came from. And, I mean, outside of going to the arcade with Punky Overton on Friday nights, man, in Annapolis at Parole, that was pretty much the social life for me, man. It was, when's the next game? When can I watch? And remember, at that time, we really didn't have as many opportunities to watch sports like we do now with games every night on every cable channel, ESPN Plus, all that stuff that allows us to absorb content. I mean, if we'd had that back then, I don't know if I'd have ever left the house.
It's actually funny, Pete, you mentioned it. I remember I lived with my grandparents growing up too, and we got one of those antenna turners. So you could turn your antenna.
Rotary antenna,
exactly. Yeah. And we could get the Baltimore channel. So I would have to go and check the games in the Washington Post, see what Baltimore had. Like, well, I want to watch that game. So I'm turning the antenna to try and get the different game than 5 had, or that was even when you had the rules that you couldn't have a game. If your team was at home, you didn't get the second half of the doubleheader. Oh. So you're trying to get it in Baltimore. So I'm very familiar, younger than you, but I did some of the same things.
But you know what, though, to your point, people don't realize this now. Younger people won't realize this, but one of the greatest TV packages that ever came about, 1980, or I think it was 79 or 80, the Big East on Channel 5.
Yep.
And with Len Berman, the original play-by-play of the Big East, followed by Mike Gorman.
Yep.
Obviously, Raph, eventually after coaching at Seton Hall, became, legendary color man on those Big East broadcasts. Dave Gavitt, I think, if I'm not mistaken, also after he was done at Providence, did some color on those games as well. But Len and Mike Gorman, I still correspond with Len on Twitter these days, talking about those old days of the Big East. And I mean, that really changed our television viewing, and it really made Georgetown. I mean, look, we had great radio influences, obviously, with Johnny and Rich Shavatkin, doing those schools games. But, Georgetown became a household name in our community because of that Big East package. Everybody knew about Maryland because Maryland was on the Sail with the Pilot at the Wheel, the Jefferson Pilot one with Jim Thacker and Billy Packer on the weekends. Then all of a sudden, this Monday night package pops up with Georgetown and Syracuse, and it takes us inside. And we watch all these rivalries in the Big East develop right before our eyes. We got to see Gary Williams coaching at Boston College before he ever got to the University of Maryland. You think about that package as a kid. For me, Monday night, I'm right there in front of my TV, watching Tony Red Bruin and all those great players. I mean, Eddie Spriggs was the first real, Georgetown center that people had. That 79 team that was within a whisker of going to the Final Four. And then we obviously saw what Coach Thompson was able to build off of that run over the next few years with that program. But, that was an amazing package that was on over-the-air television that probably helped change. It changed, certainly brought the Big East into focus. It made Georgetown a household name. And for those of us locally, Monday nights was must-see television with the Big East, because during that part of the year, it kind of filled the void after Monday Night Football and before we got to Monday Night Baseball, which was some of the weeknight consumption that we had at that time through those games on ABC.
Pete, before we get into your sporting career, we have to take this one small step that you were still trying to practice your craft, even though you weren't in the business yet. I've heard a story that you used to work at McDonald's. You would work the drive-through and you would do your best announcer voice when you would go ahead and take people's orders. True story?
Absolutely 100% true. When I first started working there, and I guess there was this pattern. When you first start working at McDonald's as a 16-year-old, in fact, I think I could start I started at 15 and 9 months. Because I had my learner's permit and a work permit, so I could work so many hours a week at that time. They teach how to make Big Macs. So I'm making Big Macs and, putting it on this little 3-layer thing. I'm like, oh, this is cool, but, eventually, because I was willing to wake up early, they put me on biscuits. I learned how to make biscuits in the morning, all the 12 regs, 6 quarters, all that stuff. But they realized, my manager, Elizabeth Tasker at the time, realized, she said, "Hey, you're really good at talking." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yes, ma'am. I am. I like to talk." She said, "Would you like to work drive-through?" So you remember Louis Anderson, who said, "Maybe one day you'll get promoted to fries," when he was on Coming to America. Well, Pedro passed fries. I went right to the drive-through window, and it was an amazing time. I'll give you a true story here. Lady used to come through every morning in a Toyota truck, and it said 4-by-play on her tag. I'll never forget, 2 years later, because I'm still working at McDonald's at the time, but I'm also start stringing covering high school sports for the Capital newspaper. Mm-hmm. I'm so psyched up to get my first check from the Capital. I get my check in Annapolis. I go racing home. And of course, I go down this side road in South County and I get a ticket. Sure enough, the person that I see in there as the stenographer is the same lady who comes through my drive-through window at McDonald's. And she saw me walk up there and she just started chuckling. So because I looked at her and she looked at me, we just started chuckling with each other. Small world, how we remember all those details. But yeah, I mean, to me, that was the first place I had a headset on and I could practice talking to an audience, to people. And it was a really fun experience. I really enjoyed we had a ridiculous team of people, Lester Peters, Scott Parker, Carol, Kim, Kendra, Angie, that last check, Angie's still managing McDonald's up Severna Park. Last time I checked, we had an incredible crew, and we were all good friends. But it gives you a chance to have some responsibility, and that's the great thing about working at a McDonald's or somewhere like that. It's structure, it's responsibility, but also it's a paycheck. So it's a chance to earn, chance to learn how to manage your money, and things of that nature. So I would recommend for any young person, even if that's the way you have to start out, especially to make some ends meet. What a great way to start your broadcasting career, by putting on the headset at McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, or any of the other great locations we have around the area. And it gets you comfortable in front of talking to people. Because, Jeremy, I think the biggest thing right now we have people that are so uncomfortable with communication. Why? Their whole communication is this right here. All they do is go, do, text everybody. We don't talk to people. We don't verbally talk to people. We don't develop vocabulary. And I think that's the big thing right now, that even jobs like that at least helps somebody talk. You got to communicate with people. And that was a great way for me to communicate with people at a young age.
Pete, you mentioned your early beginnings at the Capital Gazette. There was another guy who a lot of folks know, especially in the DC area, that was kind of your early angel. Talk about Dave Johnson kind of helping you get a boost in your career.
I have no career without Dave Johnson. I'm comfortable in saying that. Dave was part of a team of people that really made me who I am. Him, Brett Friedlander at the Capitol. Just an incredible team of people there. Jerry Jackson, Al Hopkins, Bob Mosier, who's now been, he's been the spokesperson for Anne Arundel County Public Schools for many years. Dave Broughton, Craig Anderson, the late John McNamara, fabulous influence. The late Joe Gross. I mean, these are all people that were incredible influences. None more than Dave, though. Dave gave me a chance at 17 years old. I hadn't turned 18 yet because I skipped a grade. He gave me a chance to do a high school sports show in this little shoebox studio at WNAV every Saturday morning, 9:30. And I would follow him and Joe Cohen out to, high school football games when I could on Friday nights, and that they did on WNAV. And it was to learn from Dave. You see the work ethic. It's why I have the work ethic that I do now, because I had a chance to emulate one of the best at it. And without Dave's graciousness and opportunity, willing to teach, me having an open mind, willing to learn, we as young broadcasters, sometimes we get, I see a lot of it now. I wouldn't say a lot, but I do see a small section of it. You got young dudes that come out of these big broadcasting schools and immediately feel like they should be ascending to the top without, doing something else along the way. But Dave was fabulous. That opportunity, I will be forever grateful for. The learning and his willingness to educate and give opportunity. It's why I try to give back as much to young broadcasters now, because Dave gave to me, and I feel like it's my way of paying it back to them, trying to give them some semblance of an influence like I had with Dave. Just one of the greatest human beings on planet Earth, continues to look disease right in the eye right now and crush it, and continues to be one of the very best in the NBA and MLS as well, because there are not many more people that you can associate with DC United. DC United is what they are because of Dave Johnson. No one worked harder to promote DC United in the community and make them a household name in the community through the years than Dave Johnson has.
Pete, I was looking at your bio. It said you helped establish a radio station at age 20. Is that a true story as well?
AM 960 The Game, still on in Salisbury right now. I started it using this fledgling sports network out of Las Vegas. One of their look, there was no ESPN radio, there was no Fox Sports Radio, not CBS, Infinity, whatever the heck they're called now. Wasn't any of that back then. There was only this Sports Fan Radio Network. So I did a local show in Salisbury, and then we flipped it on the bird, and it was the corniest intro I've ever heard, but it stuck with me. Papa Joe Chevalier.
I remember him.
Papa Joe Chevalier, and he's like, "Oh, come right." Part of the intro is like, "Your table's right this way." And I'm like, "What the heck is this?" But it was guys like him. It was the first time I'd ever heard John Renshaw, who was, now he's been Renshaw, I think, been working with or, for the Raiders in some, capacity for years. But John was this young, enthusiastic, little bombastic, but he was the perfect 10 p.m. sports host at that time. So that was, that getting that radio station on the air, the fact that Ron Gilinardo, Brad Tholen, who was the DJ on Q105, which was our FM counterpart, he's the one that named me Pete the Sports Guy, and it kind of stuck. So it's kind of morphed into Pete on Sports now. But those 5 years that I worked in Pocomoke City, Salisbury, the people that I met, who I'm still friends with, many of them today, it's 5 of the greatest years of my life. It allowed me to make a lot of mistakes without question. And you don't get to do that now with social media and everything. Some of the mistakes that you make you make a mistake in broadcasting now, and it is just boom, it's all over the place. Back then, as an 18-year-old, I could make some mistakes. I could learn from those mistakes, and but it was great. I would referee a 4 o'clock high school game, and I'd broadcast the 5:30 game at the same site. So it was a great experience for those 5 years. But just met some incredible people along the way. Sandy Alexander, just a tremendous. She was one of the best, disc jockeys, period, that I've ever met. So relatable with her audience. It was a great time. It's a great time in life, and it was a great place to learn how to do this without getting crucified for some of the mistakes that you make that you probably would get, really hurt by doing some of those things now.
Pete, the picture I just showed, I believe that was from down in your time in Virginia Beach. You would get a fortuitous break there that would really help define you as a broadcaster, but it was going to be a long way away from where you were. I believe you get a chance to do horse racing, but it's up back in Ocean City, Maryland. Kind of tell me about that process of finding out the opportunity and then trying to figure out, can I even do this?
Look, back then it was not even figuring out how we're going to do it. We're just going to do it. We'll figure how we do it. We'll just kind of do on the fly. 1996, my first ever, ironically, when I was in Salisbury working there, the late Mike Keitel, who was the announcer at Ocean Downs, Scott Warren and myself, 2 18-year-olds, wanted to be announcers, and he took us under his wing. And Scott now is the race secretary at the Meadowlands, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, harness racing track in America. And you know, Mike was incredibly gracious with his time. He taught us how to do it the right way. I mean, look, we get to do a post parade. That's just introducing the horses. We didn't get a chance to do the race, but he would let us do a post parade from time to time. And we thought that was the greatest thing, on planet Earth at that time. But it allowed us to come up the right way. It allowed us to get the fundamentals underneath of us first. And in 1996, I had the chance to be the full-time announcer there. And I was also doing mornings with Scott Jackson in Norfolk. So it was look, you're getting done in Ocean City around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. You're driving down Route 13 in the middle of the night through the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. And you're getting back, you know, if you're lucky, to Virginia Beach around 1:30. And then I'd have to be at the radio station, obviously, to do a 6 o'clock show. It was tough, but I wouldn't trade it for anything because it gives me the opportunity that I have now of being the voice of Rosecroft. And you just never know when you're going to need a job. And being able to do that, my passion for harness racing in particular, thanks to Linda Future and Tom Future, who lived in the neighborhood I did when I was 14 years old. She was the resident manager of the neighborhood. So whenever a senior citizen needed their grass cut, she would call me and I'd go cut their grass. And eventually I started going to Rosecroft and the Free State Raceway with them because they had horses with one of the greatest of all time in Roger Hammer. And I've had that love for harness racing since I was, 14 years old. And here I am at 54 now, still doing the races at Rosecroft and loving every minute of it. And, you don't do it because, I mean, they're only racing 2 days a week when we do. So it's not like you're doing it to get rich or anything. But the people I've met in the harness racing industry are some of the most incredibly down to earth, salt of the earth people. Many of them I've been friends with for 40 years. And I would not change it no matter how hard it is at times, to fit it into the schedule. I'm gracious that Lisa Watts, my general manager now at Rosecroft, understands my Navy schedule. Sometimes things happen, my Nat schedule, through September, which sometimes can present some potholes, but it's incredible to do that because the people that you meet along the way, this from a lot of the play-by-play and the student athletes you've dealt with through the years. Sometimes you just come across people and you're like, man, these are really good people. These are people that I want to stay in touch with. They become part of your life, part of your fabric, your entire life.
Pete, before we get into your career at Navy, which is such a big part of you right now, when people think Pete Medhurst, they think Navy. I got to ask you one question. I heard a story over the years that at one point you were doing traffic and you were doing it from a helicopter. Is that a true story?
Partially true. I did it from an airplane.
Okay.
But yes, I did 10 years of airborne traffic on WMAL. And it was an extraordinary experience. Because you think of the legends like Captain Dan, Andy Parks, who did traffic for years on WMAL, and you come along, you're the next guy in line. You're like, holy cow, this is an amazing position that you're in. And when WMAL finally, after 10 years, decided to stop doing airborne traffic altogether, I mean, it was kind of a tough moment. Worked with great people there. Jim Russ, who, probably next to Bob Marburg and, Lisa Baden, maybe the late Jim Russ, probably the most identifiable traffic voices in the neighborhood on the FM and AM dial. Jim was an amazing teacher. Eventually went to WBAL, who I do some work with now. And I go by the traffic booth there, and there's a big plaque of Jim Russ right there on the outside of the booth. And it was amazing to be able to listen and learn from him and Bob Marburg on a daily basis, flying around. The great Stan Fetter gave us great airplanes. I had great pilots. One of my pilots was an engineer on Air Force One at one point. His cousin, I believe it is still a scout for the Commanders, in their college scouting areas. So funny world, how you meet people, you put connections together. But driving around the Beltway, and obviously, 9/11 changed a lot. If 9/11 doesn't occur, we're probably still doing airborne traffic because of the way, once that happened, we weren't able to go over the city the way we used to. You had to go around a much wider area, and you really lost out on some of the specific stuff. I will say this, though. Airborne traffic is still, and I love it when I see Captain Roy Taylor up in Baltimore doing stuff on Channel 11. It's still better than this internet stuff that we're using today. Sure, you got cameras and all that other stuff. There's nothing better than having a real life traffic spotter there or somebody looking over top of it who can really give you the full picture, because we don't get the full picture and the details in our traffic reporting that we used to. So I still think that's one of the lost arts of, traffic reporting in 2024. Everybody says, oh, we got a camera, or the internet will tell us, oh, there's a red line, there's slow traffic. Yeah, it's slow, but are you going to be moving soon? Or is it stopped altogether because you got cars that are flipped over and crashed all over the roadway, and got fire rescue everywhere? I think those are some of the details that we lose, and some of those details that we don't give our listeners now in traffic reporting that airborne traffic certainly made, part of every day, was it part of every day's, morning listening and afternoon listening while they were driving to and from work.
Pete, we mentioned it before. You get in over at Navy. It's an area that you were familiar with from your time working in your early days. How did you get in the door at the Naval Academy as one of their broadcasters?
It's ironic. I came back from Virginia Beach, and Navy had just literally a couple of weeks before, a month before, hired Bob Sosi to be their voice. And I just said, I started working, doing some stuff at, WNAV. And I just, told Eric Rudin at Navy, hey, if you ever need a backup, whatever, I'm here. My first foray, ironically, because I played baseball growing up, all the way up I played fall ball at Anne Arundel Community College and was going to be on the team in the spring, but I started working with Dave at WNAV and the Capitol. I was able to make really good money out of it because it really paid well at the time, especially the stuff at the Capitol. Stringing was terrific. So I took a huge risk, and I started doing that basically full time at that time. So, that was a great part of this, but I just missed on timing. I mean, timing is everything. Bob was amazing. The one hole in my game at that point, because I started doing that when I was 27, the one hole in my game was really understanding why you prepared, what you prepared. And I learned that from Bob. And that is what I thought really allowed me to take my play-by-play in another direction. But ironically, my first assignment with him was doing color with Bob on lacrosse games. And, having played baseball, I had to learn about lacrosse. I knew it from watching and, covering lacrosse games while I was at the Capitol. So I had working knowledge of it, but that was my break to get in to Navy. And, this year, with our first game coming up August 31st against Bucknell, I'm starting my 26th year being part of the Navy, broadcast crew. But it was because I was willing to take a chance and do lacrosse, something that I had never done, that allowed me to open a door there that obviously has been so instrumental in, feeding my family for a long time.
Pete, what are some of those fundamentals that Bob taught you?
It's not just get a roster and say, Joe Smith throws it to Bobby Jones, there's a bucket. It's about, obviously all their statistical information. And now through the years, obviously, Google is our friend. We can go even deeper into that preparation. We can find those little nuggets about players. And you don't always have to use them. Sometimes you don't get an opportunity. I mean, a guy may only play a couple of plays, may only touch it a couple of times. So you may not have a chance to use it that day, but it gave me the impression that just be prepared that at any point, any player could, rear their head up and have a big game. And you want to sound like, and tell people who this person is. You want to be able to tell them, well, this guy's got 28 tonight. Well, maybe in high school, he had a 40-point game somewhere along the way. It's that information. It's biographical stuff, even simple biographical stuff, like open up the media guide. They give you great basic information right there. At minimum, you should have that. But now we have unbelievable ways to come up with prep for games. It's so funny. My father-in-law, the great Glenn Joyce, huge Orioles fan, says to me, "Boy, that Kevin Brown's got a lot of stats." And I'm like, "Oh," I said, "Pop, that's game prep right there. He's doing a lot of preparation, and obviously with these Orioles players, they're good, and he wants to give you as much information." But that's what I learned from Bob. It was not only knowing who the players were that were making the baskets, the basic fundamental of it all, but it was the preparation that had to go along with it, the more in-depth preparation. There's nobody more prepared for a game than Bob Socci. Absolutely not. His work with the Patriots has been impeccable. And Bob is a guy that deserved an opportunity like that far sooner. Probably should have come in baseball far sooner than even his shot with the Patriots. He was doing Norfolk Tides, Albuquerque Isotopes, minor league baseball. That's how I got to do Navy lacrosse, because Bob would go off and do, the minor league baseball teams. And he should have had an opportunity because he's a great baseball broadcaster as well. So glad he finally got the opportunity with the Patriots, been able to build an unbelievable career with just one of the best organizations in all of professional sports, great family, wife, 2 beautiful kids. And his work and his ability to pass that on and observe him doing what he did, I will be forever invaluable for, because it really allowed me to become the broadcaster that's necessary to do games nowadays.
Pete, you're known as a guy that can call anything. I mean, your kind of catalog is really big. Is that talent, or is that just willpower of buckling down and figuring it out?
I don't know. I mean, Jeremy, look, we watch guys play multiple sports. We watch Dave Winfield get drafted in 3 sports. We watch Dion play baseball and football at, beyond reasonable levels. I mean, his baseball play was very representative. I think sometimes you're just, you got to be careful how you answer the question, because the one thing I don't have is an arrogant bone in my body, but I do believe people are blessed to be born with something. It's whether you realize you have something like that and you make the most of it. And nothing drives me crazier when I see talented people just mess things up with themselves because they can't behave, can't do the fundamental things in life right, and they screw it up. We see, plenty of, celebrities, athletes, all that stuff. People in our communities do that all the time. I believe I was put on the earth to do one thing professionally, and I'm doing it. And I have been doing it since I was 17 years old. I don't have the Syracuse, I don't have the Northwestern, I don't have the Maryland background. I did this for lack of a better term, I'm probably not supposed to be where I'm at. How ironic is it that a guy that's broadcasting games for the Naval Academy is raised by his grandparents in a trailer park? I went to 1 semester of junior college. I took a speech class with Professor Joe Lamp. Great picture you just showed. I'm doing swimming meets with Rowdy Gaines, who's, the face of American swimming. I get to work with incredible kids at the United States Naval Academy. And a kid that comes from a trailer park with no college is probably not supposed to be, doing the things that I'm doing. I don't like to use the word discrimination, because there are a lot of people in our world that have been discriminated against in far stronger areas. So I do believe sometimes I probably get a little bit of the short shrift because I don't have that part of the resume. But because I was around great influences growing up, and I grew up in the DC, Baltimore area around some of the most talented sports people ever, I knew what it was supposed to sound like. I'm listening to Chuck Thompson and Bill O'Donnell on Orioles games growing up. Chuck Thompson is still one of the greatest broadcasters ever been, football and baseball. He was great on both the Orioles and the Colts games. I work with Charlie Slows and Dave Jagler now. I mean, I'm blessed to be the number 3 on the Nationals Network. And one of them, they rarely have to take a day off. Dave's lucky enough to get ESPN radio assignments because he's a great broadcaster. So I get to fill in for them. 2019, did 15 games. Nats went 12-3. Pedro got a World Series ring. Blessed to do post-game shows for them now. But in theory, if you look at how this is supposed to be written out, my path is certainly less than conventional. I wouldn't recommend it to people, but it doesn't mean you can't, Jeremy. That's the thing. It doesn't mean you can't. And, I hope, if anything, when I talk to young kids and I talk about life's paths, I hope that's one thing that they take away from it is, don't let somebody tell you you can't, because you can. You just have to not give up. You just have to keep at it. There's jobs all over the country. Mine got started because I was willing to go to Salisbury and Pocomoke City and do high school games in places like Princess Anne and referee a game and then broadcast the next game and work. I worked at McDonald's in Pocomoke, there to make ends meet on the nights I didn't have games. But you have to be willing to do it. You can't just sit around, sit there on your phone all night waiting for somebody to call you, because that's not how this gets done. You got to be willing to go take those chances, go to those small markets, and you'd be amazed at what going to one of those small markets allows you to do as a broadcaster in terms of building a resume, building a career. And I got pretty lucky that at times that it worked out. I mean, my family made incredible sacrifices. The 2 years I was working in, Virginia Beach with Scott and John D. Candido, the Swami, Sam Agami, who's now a teacher. Richie Somerville was one of our board ops. And a couple of years ago, Hampton makes the NCAA tournament in basketball, and ESPN plays the cut, and it's Richie Somerville doing the play-by-play. So, you talk about a proud papa in a situation like that. I'm like, man, I worked with that guy, 30 years ago in Norfolk, and to hear him doing the play-by-play of a Hampton game, sending them to the NCAA tournament. I mean, we had people, but I'll tell you what, that Norfolk station, Jeremy, me and Scott, Johnny D, Tony Mercurio, Old Dominion legend in the afternoon. That was a lot of fun. That was a really good station. And ironically, Susquehanna Broadcasting, who had never sold any of their properties, got an offer they couldn't refuse and sold that one. And you talk about devastating. And it was, I really wish we could have seen that. But you know what? There, I got to do play-by-play for Hampton University, Virginia Wesleyan. I got to do the public address announcing for the women's basketball at Old Dominion. And I'm sitting there one day, Old Dominion's best team ever, and Tisha Panachero is just carving up Tennessee. And Pat Summitt just kind of sits on the table right in front of me. And she looks at me. She goes, I know we're not playing well, but we're not getting many calls either. And I looked at her and I said, Coach, I know you're not getting any calls. You're right. Because I'm not going to tell Pat Summitt. She's right. Look, there was one referee, I swear to God, when Old Dominion played, Wendy Larry had her in her pocket. It was every game. And when I saw that lady walk out of the tunnel, I knew at that point, number one, Old Dominion had a really good chance that night, because they were a great team and they had this one referee in the building. But it was, look, Old Dominion played so good, it didn't matter. And Pat Summitt even said that at the press conference afterwards, because that team just played as good a game of basketball against us. And, Tisha Panachero, just phenomenal. Still to this day, in my mind, the best WNBA point guard that's ever been. And that was a lot of fun. But again, it's opportunity. You're doing something. And you just never know where a connection is going to lead one day somewhere down the road, which is why you always treat people with respect. You're always kind. You're always nice. Don't come across as egotistical. Don't big time people because you never know. While things are going good for you, there may be a time where things aren't going so good, and you may need that person in your corner again. And it's been a fun existence getting to this point. And I, knock on wood, I hope there's a lot more out there still to be had.
Pete, you were there at Navy doing sports. You get the basketball job, and talking to you, you're very content with that. Well, at one point, Bob Sochi ends up getting the job with the Patriots, and it's time for them to pick somebody, and they pick Pete Medhurst. What was it like finding out that you were going to be doing Division I football at a quote-unquote legacy program? We know the whole Group of Five thing, but if you're talking about the teams that move the needle there, Army and Navy are always going to be that. You get the job with Navy. What was that like?
I mean, I'm a pretty emotional person. And when I went to lunch with the AD, Chet Gladchuck, who's just been unbelievable to me, Eric Rudin, who is in charge of our broadcasting operations, obviously Scott Strassmeyer, best SID in all of America. These people they've been good to me. If they'd have gone outside and had conversations with other people, completely would have understood. Like I said, my resume is not the traditional resume, but my work there, my willingness to always be there for them, to fill in as a backup, take on anything they gave me, whether it be fill in as a PA person or do whatever. You know, I think they understood that I was willing to come on board and be that person for Navy athletics. And more importantly, with my local ties, I was somebody that was likely probably going to be staying there. You know, and it just, I'll never forget when I got in the car after having the lunch. I still get a little choked up about it now because of the opportunity that it gave me. I started crying, you know, and when I think about it, I just wish there was a way for me, because I still obviously have a great relationship with my birth mother now, and I know she's incredibly proud of me. But I wish there was a way for me somehow to just ask my grandparents, you know, my grandfather fought for England in World War II. My grandmother came over here from Ireland after World War II. They met each other in Chicago, of all places, and eventually end up in D.C. I'm born in Anacostia, of all places, the first few years before we moved out to southern Anne Arundel County when I was 2. I just wish there was a way I could sit down at a table with the two of them, just have a hug and just ask them if they are proud of what I was able to accomplish, especially without that traditional resume and not a ton of funds growing up to, you know, explore college and things of that nature, and just running with what ability I had to talk and making the most of it. You know, I just wish I was able to have 5 minutes with them. I'd give anything for 5 minutes with them right now, just to be able to do that. And, you know, I've been blessed with an unbelievable family. They made incredible sacrifices for me the 2 years I was in Virginia Beach. You know, they were up here watching my boys become incredible adults right now. You know, Ryan played basketball at Hood's, great basketball coach. You know, he could fit on Kevin Willard or, you know, Ed Cooley's staffs. He did a clinic one year over at O'Connell with Ed Cooley. I got a picture of Ryan and Ed Cooley together. I mean, he'd be an asset to any of those guys, any of the local programs, because he's such a good coach and a great recruiter. He has the gift I have of talking. Mm-hmm. But Ryan can go into any, you know, living room and, you know, just crush it. You know, Cody obviously scored 1,000 points at the Division I level, you know, because he, you know, he was kind of in a similar vein. Could he have been a Division II or Division III All-American? Absolutely. But he was not going to be deterred from his goal, and, you know, eventually makes it, you know, at the Division I level, scores 1,000 points, and, you know, blessed with a daughter right now who's pretty good at softball. She's got a chance. Hopefully we can see that through. But, you know, obviously, you know, my wife Brenda's been, you know, incredibly unselfish through the years, because she has, you know, she has sacrificed so much. The kids have sacrificed so much on my behalf to allow me to chase the things, you know, professionally, that, you know, you can't make it without people like that in your life. You just can't. I mean, they've been an incredible part of my life for, you know, 30 years. And I wouldn't trade, you know, anything that would I like to change the professional path a little bit so I could have given them more time than I did? Absolutely. That's probably the one regret that I have, is not being able to, you know, weigh those two, because there was a time where I just felt like I got to work. If somebody offers me, you know, this stupid high school gig for $25 a game, I got to go do that. I mean, you know, we've done those things. We've done those small jobs that somebody said, oh yeah, we'll pay you. Well, and they don't eventually pay you. And you realize they're not going to pay you. You know, we've all been there and done that, but you can't do those things. You can't get those reps without sacrifices made by other people along the way. There's no doubt about that.
Pete, you talk about big time moments in your career that you've got to do because of the support of your family. I would say none of them can be bigger than Army Navy. To me, sometimes I say it's even bigger than the Super Bowl because what comes with the Super Bowl, all the kind of quote unquote BS with it. Army Navy, the purity of that game and that rivalry. The first time you got to do one of those games, obviously you'd been a sideline reporter, so you were exposed to it. But I remember I used to work for the PGA Tour Network, and they talked about the first time you hit a shot at the Ryder Cup. It was the biggest obstacle to get over by so many golfers, even the Masters. It was bigger than that because of all it represented. What was it like when you got to do Army Navy and getting over the butterflies that I'm sure may have been in your stomach? You're a confident guy, but I'm sure even that had to give you a little bit in the pit down there, right?
Still does. Every time I do one, it's the game. You never know where people are listening from. Some can tell you where they're listening from. Some can't. That's how, the game goes. I mean, people are hidden in places of the world that we don't know, protecting our freedom. Yeah, I mean, that game exudes so much more than just football. It's amazing men and women, part of each organization that make it so. And I'll never forget, I think it was Noah Copeland with a touchdown run for Navy. And CBS always plays a play-by-play cut of one of the touchdowns or the difference-making touchdown in a game, in the Army-Navy game. And Vern Lundquist, who was my guy growing up, loved listening to Vern do so much, but he was my guy growing up. Vern goes, here's Pete Medhurst on the Navy Radio Network, and my phone is blowing up. I have no idea what people are talking about. They're like, Vern Lundquist just said your name. I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, game still had like a minute or two left in it. I'm like, what's going on here? And eventually I found out what happened. But it just tells you the magnitude of that game and how many people are watching. People that you wouldn't even think are watching Army Navy, message you going, hey, I heard Vern Lundquist say your name and all that other stuff. And, it truly is extraordinary. If you've never been to one, you have to go to at least one, just to see it. And I know it is like an event. It's priced like an event because it's in an NFL venue all the time. I know, tickets are scarce. Sometimes you got to go to the secondary market and, you got to bite that bullet, even though you got $41 ticket fees attached to these things now in a lot of these secondary markets. I get it. But if you've never been there, it's an amazing experience because we still see what college football was, kind of should be still. We know it's not, but this is just one of our glimpses into what it's supposed to be all about. And as I remind people, the most important thing is the young people you see on the field that day, sure, they want to beat the bejeeber out of each other that day. They want to walk out of that tunnel as the winner that day. They want to sing second. But those young men will be teammates on the greatest fighting force in the world. When the world has a problem, they flash the bat phone for the United States. And it's because of these young men and women that we work with at these respective academies that make it so. And, I've interviewed multiple athletes who have perished in the line of protecting our freedom. And it gives you a reality check on exactly what these young men and women do. 36 varsity sports plus an incredible club menu of sports at the United States Naval Academy. We get to see them in their moments of triumph. We get to see them in their moments of sadness and losing games. We see how hard they work. They work just like your players at Maryland and Georgetown and George Mason and George Washington and American. They work the same way. They work just as hard. They just have a much smaller practice window. It's all, it's more condensed, hour and a half practice window, sometimes 2 hours if you're lucky. Yeah. Coach gets 2 hours and 5 minutes. They're like, yeah, this is a great day. But they understand that these young men and women are much more about than just the athletic teams that they're playing on at the Division I level. They've chosen to serve a much higher calling, and that's defending our freedom upon graduation.
Pete, one of the few things I think it could compare to calling an Army-Navy game is a Major League Baseball game. There's just such magic about MLB on the radio, maybe even more popular sports like the NFL. It's just not the same thing. You got the chance to call Major League Baseball games for the Nationals. Charlie Slows, Dave Jagley, you kind of referenced it earlier, but I would have to think, you talked about you're an emotional guy. There had to be a lot of emotions flowing that day. I believe it was against the Reds. I believe I listened to it that day. I believe I was mowing the lawn when I did, but I made sure to make time to hear Pete on the radio. But again, what was that moment like to kind of finally realize that dream? It's such a milepost for broadcasters, a major league game. What was that like? Take us back to that day.
Two times, I'll give you two stories here. Two times I've been scared to death as a broadcaster. First one, obviously, I'll back up a series. It was the Reds were the series that weekend in Cincinnati. The first series was in Atlanta, and it was the series in Atlanta where they were 19-31 heading to Atlanta. This is where everything changed. You know, I got a little goatee here. You know, I can kind of be Mike Rizzo's doppelganger a little bit. So I won't take any credit for the 19-31 turnaround, but I was 12-3 in those games that I did that season. Strasburg nearly throws a no-hitter down in Atlanta. He was absolutely ridiculous. And but I was scared to death because and obviously now with social media, when you fill in for Charlie Slows and Dave Jagley, this is the best tandem on the radio in all of Major League Baseball, in my opinion. So when you're filling in for one of those guys, the audience expects you to be just as good as Charlie and Dave. Now, there's no chance I can be as good as Charlie and Dave. I hadn't done a major league game ever before. But again, I go back to when Bob Sosi taught me about preparation. And, you know, I was prepared for the innings that I had to do. I had nuggets about every guy. And I just, you know, but more importantly, I listened to Charlie and Dave. So if you listen to Charlie and Dave, you're like, okay, this is what it's supposed to sound like. And this is how you do it. And you can't go wrong that way. Two incredible guys to emulate. Now, you can't be them, but you can do the things that they're doing that allow them to be as great as they are. So if you emulate those traits, Jack Hicks, the engineer, is incredibly helpful. Vic Ferreira, their network engineer, incredibly helpful because they know what it's supposed to sound like. They share little tidbits with you off mic and, you know, at the hotel or at the restaurant and stuff like that help you along the way. And without that help, you know, you probably, you know, you can flame out doing stuff like that. But, you know, I'm lucky enough to be their first call when one of those guys is out. Obviously, September gets a little more jammed up because of my Navy schedule, but I'm blessed to have the opportunity with them. As I said, it led to a World Series ring. And it's, you know, I think about all the days growing up when we're watching Joe Garagiola, Tony Kubek, and I go to Arizona to do a series with Charlie, and I see all the Joe Garagiola stuff and what he meant to the Diamondbacks organization that's on the wall there. Second time I was scared to death, I'll give you this one too. Laurel Raceway decided to race during the summer one time when it wasn't planned on the schedule. Well, their announcer, Dave Rodman, who again, I think Dave Rodman's the best thoroughbred announcer in the country at Laurel Park. He does races at Laurel and Pimlico. Well, they asked me to fill in for him for an entire month of July. They're like, hey, man, we want you to do this. Now, I'm a harness racing guy. Thoroughbreds are a little bit different. Harness racing, man, we got 8 horses. We all follow each other in a nice little tight little line going all the way around 1 mile. That's it. Thoroughbred's a little different. You can have as many as 14 in a race. Or the Kentucky Derby, we see 20. You can see as many as 4 or 5. Sometimes they go a short race. Nothing like having 14 horses in a 5.5 furlong race. You got to try and get all 14, at least one mention during the course of the race. But when you're filling in for Dave Rodman, again, people expect that to be perfect. They expect you to be on point, be just as good. No excuses if you're filling in and you flub something. You know, you're doing Laurel Park, you're doing Pimlico, and you're filling in for Dave Rodman. You got to be great. Ironically, the first day I'm in the booth, we get rained out, we get lightning. We had lightning and thunder. So I didn't even get to do the first day. So I don't know if that made it easier or harder the next day to come back. But that entire month, you're scared to death, but it led to me being able to fill in for Paul Espinosa at Charlestown, and certainly something that I could do, you know, pretty easily, quite frankly, now if another thoroughbred track asked me to do. But before that, no chance. I'd have been scared to death because filling in for a guy like Dave Rodman, you know, it would be like being asked to fill in for Jim Nance or Mike Tirico now, you know, on NBC, Nance on CBS. fill in for Al Michaels, anybody like that. I mean, Keith Jackson. I mean, what a great influence we had growing up. Can you imagine the people that had to come along and once Keith Jackson retired and you got to be the next person in line? I mean, come on, man. I mean, those are gigantic shoes that they ask you to fill. And you know, there's no filling the shoes of a guy like Keith Jackson. So much admiration for guys that follow great broadcasters and knock it out of the park the way many of our broadcasters do right now.
Well, Pete, this has been a great hour. Thank you so much for your time. As I don't know if it's Grant Paulson or somebody else always calls you the hardest working guy in sports broadcasting. They're not far off the mark if they're not right on the nose. Pete, thank you for taking so much time here on Huber and Friends.
Appreciate you, Jeremy. Thank you very much.